this is the first video I'm popping up onto my YouTube channel and sending through my email group, we are coming up to the time change, the falling back, which before we all had kids was awesome because we gained an hour that we could do whatever we wanted with. Now the people that need it the most, parents with young kiddos, are actually a bit shortchanged with this end of daylight savings time. So I am on here to give you some tips on how to handle this time change. It tends to be a little easier than the spring forward. In fact, we know from research that the increase in risk of car accidents with the spring forward is certainly a factor in the sleep deprivation that happens when we all lose an hour, whether we have kids or not. But with the fall back, there are still some strategies that can make the transition a little smoother. So generally, there are three approaches. One is you can spend the week before the time change, adapting and nudging things a bit to match the new schedule. Or you can wait till after and just go by the new time on the clock and manage that way. And the third option, one that is simple and goes with the flow of nature a little bit more, is to do nothing in particular at all and just lean into the natural rhythms that will eventually all work out. So whichever way you choose, and there may be one that fits best with your family, depending on what's on your schedule, what's maneuverable and what's kind of fixed and sticking with the clock, like school drop-offs and whatnot. No matter which way you choose, within a week, most of us are all on track and it's all good. So there's not a lot of pressure. Way is the best way. Go with the one that makes the most sense for you. But I did want to talk about some basic principles, and then we'll talk about early risers and nighthawks. So we're gaining an hour, which means it's going to be lighter in the morning and getting darker a little earlier in the evening. So that is, and one thing to really acknowledge here too, is that this time change is human made. It's arbitrary. We go by the clock, but nature has no care in the world about what time we say our clocks are. And so really this is a human-made situation. It's a bit arbitrary. And so we can really still rely on nature's clock to help guide our circadian rhythm and get good quality sleep and adjust reasonably quickly. So there's something called Zeitgebers. And aside from it being a really fun word to say, Zeitgebers are actually the things in our environment that allow us to support our circadian rhythm. There are a few of them, but the most powerful one, like the powerhouse of Zeitgebers, is natural light. So my recommendation, regardless of how you plan on tackling the time change, is get outside in natural light. If you can't get outside, then sit by a sunny window. If your child's play space is not near a window, then consider bringing it over closer to a sunny corner of the house or spending a bit more time outside if it's warm enough. This really helps set our circadian rhythm and support that. And of course, with the time change, with it lighter in the morning, that's a natural signal to wake up. It's a natural signal for cortisol to start going up, which allows us to get up and have energy. It's a natural time for melatonin to start dropping, and sunshine certainly helps with that a lot. So that's the most powerful one. But a couple of other ones are basically things that we have in our environment or that we do that reinforces our daily rhythm. So one example is an alarm clock. Now, whether you use one or not, I'm not suggesting you should use one. We don't use one in our house, but if you do, if you have a school schedule to keep up with or work schedule or commitments in the morning, or you want to get up before the kids and you're setting the alarm so that you can have some you time, the alarm clock is a Zeitgeber. You're used to getting up when you hear it, even if you press snooze a few times. But one that is most effective, I think, in terms of what we can control as parents with young children is meal times. So we're used to meal times being spaced throughout the day. There's, in particular, in terms of our circadian rhythm, there's a morning meal, there's an evening meal, and those are bookmarks for the day. They set the tone for what's happening next. Morning, it's off to adventures and activities and play after breakfast. Nighttime meals, you can kind of manipulate when mealtime is to help set the course for the new time. And it works really well. It's so ingrained in us that things follow a certain pattern. We're creatures of habit. Even those of us that don't like very firm schedules, our bodies still tend to fit into that very well. So it's a nice thing to rely on and to think about, when can you start breakfast, or when can you make sure dinner is starting, to help with the plan for bedtime to happen at a reasonable hour, even when it's going to be earlier than expected. What this means for the fall back is that babies are maybe sleeping, getting up a little bit earlier, because to them it's 7 a.m., but now the clock is 6 a.m. and they're awake and ready to go. Or for the early risers, 5:30 a.m. becomes 4:30 a.m., which seems ungodly. In the evening, the challenge is that we're tempted to look at the clock and say, well, it's not bedtime yet, but our bodies are telling us it is. So one of the tricks that I use is to pretend that the time hasn't changed. Keep on with dinner at 6 o'clock, which means now you're offering it at 5. Our tummies will think that it's 6 o'clock. Our bodies will think it's 6 o'clock. It's only the clock that says 5 o'clock. And that way we can make sure kids are getting a meal when their body is expecting it, and then bedtime can happen a little bit earlier too. So I do want to go over specifically, though, what to do with early wakers and night hawks. So those early wakers, of course, with the fall back, it's the early mornings that are just insanely early. For some, bedtime's usually not so bad because it's a decent hour, but 4:30 wake ups are a little bit tricky. So the 3 suggestions I have is, first, go really easy on the schedule that you have and the responsibilities you have over the next week as you adjust. Consider a reverse sleep in. So go to bed earlier, go to bed with your baby, like at the same time or not very long after. So if bedtime is normally 9 o'clock for you, convince yourself that it is still 9 o'clock at 8 o'clock and go to bed. Go to bed early, and at least use that time to catch up on any of your sleep debt. And then that way in the morning, regardless of what happens, regardless of how early that morning comes for your baby, you've topped up a little bit with that reverse sleep in. The second, of course, picks up on that most powerful Zeitgeber, natural light. So get out in the morning to catch those first rays. Get out in the evening as the sun's going down. It's going to be darker in the evening earlier. That is a signal for our bodies. So get out there in the evening. It's cooler as well. And cool temperatures and a natural drop in our body temperature is also a cue for sleep. And third, no screens. So even though you think, well, it's only 8 o'clock, I still want to check email. I still want to, play that Netflix video on my phone while my baby's falling asleep. Avoid it for at least 1 hour, and probably best to have screen free for 2 hours before bed. We know that blue light interferes with melatonin, and melatonin is a helpful hormone to have in our bloodstream as we approach nighttime and sleep. So those would be the 3 strategies for early wakers. Let's talk a little bit about night hawks who are sleeping in. And so with the time change, they're probably not waking up insanely early, and they're already going to bed late. I'm making the assumption here that late is not your goal. There are some families that are entire families of nighthawks, and it works really well. But for those of you who are wishing that your baby would go to bed earlier, this is your chance to really set a new routine or new rhythm. Pretend the clock is still the time that it is. Do resist the temptation to delay bedtime to the new normal time. Pretend that it still hasn't changed. Keep dinner early. So keep it on the routine that you used to have, which is going to feel an hour earlier. Don't delay the bedtime routine just because the clock says it's not time yet. Stick with it, and really stick with it for a solid week so that you're getting into the rhythm of going to bed earlier. And it would be the normal time, but it's going to feel earlier because of the clock. And by a week in, the temptation and the natural tendency is to push that later and later again. Our natural clocks are not quite 24 hours. 24 hours is arbitrary too. We picked, well, not we, but Those that designed the 24-hour clock, which I think was the Babylonians, I'm studying ancient history at the moment, they were the first ones to use 24-hour clock, but the sun, the cycle around the sun is not exactly 24 hours. It's a little bit longer. So we end up adding a little bit of time naturally and pushing things later. So do a little bit of pretending and hold steady. And of course, the third suggestion is the same as for early risers. Get lots of natural sunlight and lots of time outside. So hopefully that helps. And I think in a nutshell, no matter what you do, probably by a week in, everything is sorted out. So don't spend more than that fretting about it because it usually works its way through simply because of all the environmental cues that we have for sleep and for the rhythm of the day. Things that you don't even think about that are automatic parts of your rhythm that indicate when it's time to get up, when it's time to play and get outside, and when it's time to slow down and go to bed. So hope that helped, and I'll catch up with you on the next time, and hope all's well. Bye for now.